Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Debating for America's Youth. My name is Nathan Fair, and today I'm interviewing the 2020 Policy Debate National Champions. Today I'm interviewing Saif Salim and Sam Ring, who are going to be with us today. Welcome, you guys.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So my first question is, so you're researching for policy debate. What does your research process look like? How do you come up with really good data points and evidence to use during the round?
There's a lot to the process. We have a variety of search engines and resources that we use, and we attempt to find the most holistic accounts of specific scenarios related to the topic to really have good evidence that we can use. We also are coach and other people that help us produce files as well, with always very good evidence that we know we can depend on.
And I think an important focus on the Heritage Hall squad, at least, is making sure that we allow for the literature to shape our research and not the other way around. We always ensure that whatever literature base we're injecting ourselves into, we're staying true to what that literature base actually says and trying to find the best arguments within it instead of artificially constructing arguments based off circumstantial evidence from across the literature base.
That makes a lot of sense. And another part of policy debate, I think a big part, is the fast speaking of policy debate. And I watched some of the round that you guys were in. And I guess how do you practice speaking fast while still keeping that efficiency and that fluency up?
So we have a variety of speaking drills that we do, and camp really helps drill this in. One that we're doing this year is an auctioneering drill where it's quick words over and over and repetitive actions to really drill in that clearness and conciseness of speech. And there's different speaking drills to practice specific skills, one where you use the word "and" between every word, or speaking backwards so that you focus on clearly defining each word and while still trying to pick up speed.
That makes sense. And then my other question, do you slow down at all being on the virtual format? Because I know with technology and stuff like that, it's harder for some people to kind of comprehend stuff. So do you slow down, or do you keep the same speed on the virtual format?
Yeah, so when debating online, you definitely do have to throttle it back a little bit. Connection issues and latency can mean that if you're speaking at the full max speed that you can make entire arguments that go unflowed by the judge because there was simply a connection issue. So deliberately slowing down and making sure that your arguments are fleshed out in a very clean way can ensure that even if there is a point here and there where the judge didn't quite get what you were saying, your argument more broadly still stands.
That makes sense. And then when you're in that round, how do you come up with efficient questions during the questioning periods?
Mainly what I do is I try and read every piece of evidence that the other team reads to really see if there's any disconnections between what they said it says versus what it actually says, and looking at the cites and the author to see if they're credible. Also if it is a recency dependent issue, such as with politics, to check when the source was published and what other events it could pertain to, such as the DNC or the RNC happening, and really taking into account all the recent political changes that have happened.
And Sam makes a good point about looking specifically at the text of evidence to make sure it agrees with what the debaters are purporting it actually does say. But there's also a value in looking at the much bigger picture and the broader perspective of how different arguments are interacting with one another. Oftentimes you'll see debaters reading arguments together which may not agree with each other in theory. Pointing out these tensions in cross-ex can be really devastating, one, just for the ethos of the other team, but also really helps you when forwarding new arguments.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then that goes back to what you guys were talking about before with actually reporting on what your articles and your data says, so then other teams can't call you out for not having consistency within your evidence and what you're saying. So that makes a ton of sense. So obviously you won the final round and you made it all the way there and had to face off against a lot of really good teams in policy debate. How do you think your team, you both, stood out to the judges with that crowd of really good competitors?
kind of like even more than just our partnership, we have a really cohesive friendship that really shows in round. Like we can kind of bounce ideas off each other quickly or say things quickly that we know what the other person is saying and what argument they're trying to explain in concise ways without having to like use too much prep time or like type arguments up for each other as much. And that really helps. And I think it kind of shows, especially in like cross-ex when like say we have to cover for the other person because they don't necessarily get it. It's not just like this abrupt stop, but it's a clean transition to the other person.
I think another thing which really shone through for nationals especially was our ability to adapt to the judging pool. Nationals is different from a lot of different tournaments across the season in that you get judges from all across the country who have very different experiences with debate. So you have to be able to, as we discussed earlier, debate at 350 words per minute in front of a national circuit judge with a whole bunch of complex knowledge of counterplans and critical arguments, but the next round be able to go to a really slow conversational, much more based in case kind of style of debating. And I feel like our ability as a team to make those transitions pretty smoothly allowed for us to have a bit of a leg up over some of the competition.
That makes a ton of sense. And yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So policy has a lot of complex parts. And I would say it's harder for like someone just to enter policy and get it compared to like an event like Congress or even like public forum. But do you have any advice for novices who are just getting started in policy debate? Anything that you would like to share to them?
So obviously this is a pretty complicated question because of, as you mentioned, policy is a very complex event. I would say advice to a novice is to just don't get overwhelmed because it is a lot. You can watch the finals round of NDCA, but that's not what debate's going to look like for you for several more years. It's a skill that comes with time and practice. And if it takes several, if not hundreds of hours to really get a succinct technical ability to debate. But once you get there, the payoff is unimaginable. So stick with it, be persevere for as long as you can, and it will pay off.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. When you guys were on like in that final round of policy, were you guys nervous at all? Because I there's like a huge stage, a bunch of people are watching, like it's a huge audience, and you have really qualified judges judging you. Do you guys feel nerves, and did that affect your round at all?
I was pretty nervous beforehand, just knowing that like my parents would be watching, my relatives would be watching, and all that. But I think honestly, being online helped with some of that because it kind of reduced the amount of stage fright, and I could really just focus on the craft itself instead of kind of being caught up in the fact that other people are viewing. And I kind of just pushed that to the back of my mind and really focused on trying to win the debate.
For me, you definitely feel the pressure of debating in finals before the round, because that's how this has all been framed to you. You know that it's the finals round. You know that it all comes down to this. And especially when announcements start in the beginning of the round before everything starts and you have to give a thank you speech to everybody, it really starts to sink in what this round is about. But as Sam was saying, since it was online, it really just felt like me and Sam in a room in any ordinary debate round, and being able to kind of divorce it from that much broader spectacle, because it was online, was really helpful, and I think did calm my nerves a lot.
That makes sense. Have you guys experienced nerves when you're debating in person with like maybe a larger audience or in front of other people?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get. Oh, you can go, Seth.
Oh, okay. My sophomore year, specifically, brings back some memories. I debated with a partner who was a senior at the time and was excellent at policy, had won the state championship several times in a row. And we broke at a national tournament and ended up debating the 1 seed. So in the back of the room was probably 40 different kids and coaches, everybody watching the round. And I'm just this measly little sophomore who barely knows how to debate. The pressure and the nerves were definitely there, but sometimes you need a bit of a trial by fire.
Yeah, and I've had kind of a similar experience at at camp, being in finals of like an intra-lab tournament between our lab and another, and kind of being in like an auditorium with 70 plus people watching. Like it's very tense. You can feel it when it's happening, but once you kind of get into the rhythm of speaking and just the rhythm of debating as a whole, you can kind of just not necessarily ignore it, but it becomes kind of secondhand, and you can really adapt well to it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I completely agree. And what you guys were talking about being virtual and not really feeling as much nerves because you just are talking to your computer, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's sometimes I think about like on YouTube, I think I have like 40,000 views, and like it's not really that big a deal to me. But if I stood in front of 40,000 people and like tried to talk, I feel like I'd be much more nervous, you know. So it is kind of, there's a lot of drawbacks to having this virtual like debate style, but I do think that one of the benefits is kind of being able to be nervous and like Sam was saying, focus on like the craft, focus on the debate, and kind of like all those other like pressures kind of like go away. So I can see the benefit of doing that. And so my final question for today's interview is, what message do you have for the debate community and for everyone watching this interview right now?
I'd say always try and make debate as inclusive as possible of all people, whether they're regardless of, you know, ethnicity, religion, sex, sexuality, etc., and just make sure that debate is an inclusive activity, because that's really what it needs to be to have the best form of discourse that it can produce.
And I 100% agree with Sam. I suppose my answer is just a touch more general. I'd say give back. The policy debate community has done so much for me in terms of giving me a home and honing this technical skill of mine, and creating a family that I love and cherish. And that's something that no other activity, no other group has done for me or given to me. And it's something that I think is really special and really unique about the policy debate community. Everybody's really looking out for each other. And I think that anytime that you can give back to that community that does so much to you or for you, it should be exactly what you do.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I completely agree with both your guys' message, and I think that I feel like the speech and debate community is definitely working towards like helping those like traditionally underprivileged groups of people. So I think that that's a good improvement. I'm glad we're walking in that direction.